Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Rute Costa, and I'm a senior lecturer here at Lancaster University. And I've been for the last year working at Orms Architects as well. So under AHRC Innovation Scholar Secondment. And we have been working on this project called Accelerating Material Reuse in Construction and using material passports. And we will be presenting that work today as well.
My name is Hoolahan. I'm an architect and co-lead our sustainability consultancy at Orms Architects. And a number of years ago, we picked up on some amazing research that had been done under a BAM 2020, an EU-funded research project. And we developed an approach to material passporting for existing buildings so that we could start reusing materials here and now. And this work has now been developed by Anna and by a lot of the speakers who are joining us for this session. So that's why we've brought them together to showcase some of the work that's been done over the past year.
Thank you. And through the work, we have been interviewing loads of people across the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. And so we have interviewed more than 30 professionals, and also we developed some workshops and focus groups. And this is kind of an overview of how we can accelerate material reuse in construction. So we're going through this graph today. One of the first things is if we have an existing building, and because in order to achieve net zero targets, we need to reduce carbon, and because of that, and 80% of the buildings that we have already, now will still exist in 2050. So in that case, we need to look at retrofitting those buildings and reusing those materials. So one of the first things is to look at the pre-redevelopment and pre-demolition audits suggested by GLA, although we think it's better to call it deconstruction instead of demolition. Also, in terms of the nature of the word. So we think every project should start with a PRDA in order to understand the condition of the buildings and what type of materials do we have there. Then, of course, one of the most efficient things is about reusing the building, because then we can keep the heritage asset and also reduce the embodied carbon that we are consuming, and because it will be worse if we were demolishing or rebuilding something new. Another thing is also thinking about how we deconstruct our buildings and how we take things apart in order to enable the reuse. So the deconstruction plan is something to look at and consider. And furthermore, is also when we talk about material reuse, it's not just reusing a piece, but also we can repair those materials, you can refurbish, you can remanufacture depending on the condition of those materials. And then, of course, they can either be used on-site or off-site, and then hopefully being back to another building later. And aligned with this, we think material passports are a good strategy because then we will be able to have a record of the building stock and also the material flows that are needed to reuse them. And of course, the literature review also shows that material passports are really important to measure circular economy metrics, to give us data to facilitate the deconstruction of the buildings, to facilitate the maintenance of the buildings. So there's several advantages in terms of documenting the materials and knowing what we've got. Similar to what has been done by the European Union, they are developing the digital product passports. And one of the key things about the passports is that we have a standardized approach, and we ensure that even if we have different systems, then we will be able to guarantee the interoperability between the systems. And one of the main reasons of this work, because it's an open source, and we would like it's more to provide that standardization and how we ensure that when you navigate from one system to another, you will be able to keep those material passports and the information. So through the work that we have done, one of the things that we found was that's really important to align with the existing classifications. So we decided to align the proposal of the different material passports types to unique class system. And for instance, if we pick the example of a window, the window will be a product in a in a building that has different materials, and then maybe a collection of windows will be a system, and then elements are probably bigger things like a structure of a building. And then another thing is also you have the building passport that encompasses all these type of material passports within it, and then you will be able to know exactly all the elements that you have on a building. And that will also enable not just for new buildings, but also for the existing buildings. So when we have an existing building, we can't aim to have like fully passported building because it's quite difficult. But then we can at least have basic information of those materials, so we enable reuse and we avoid those materials to go to waste, and we avoid increasing the landfill. So it's quite important to be flexible in the way we approach, and having in mind that the key thing is prioritize reducing the waste. And if we look at different stages of work of a project, if we have existing buildings, as we were saying, we start with the pre-redevelopment and pre-deconstruction audits, and then you have the deconstruction plan. And then we have either materials used on-site or off-site. And when you are developing a project, the idea is that we start specifying those reused materials during the project. And of course, if we are using them on-site, then we will be able to get that information into our BIM model and be a little bit more detailed. If not, maybe we'll need some flexibility. And then in stage 5, when the building starts being constructed, then we will be able to adjust those materials that we were specifying, or also get some certifications, ensure that we have everything in place in order to have those materials installed on the building. And that will enable us during the maintenance also to do the maintenance and also to inform the future deconstruction plan, and also update that through the life cycle of the building. So one of the things in terms of design is being more creative, and sometimes we also think about like being radical creative. So in this case, you have an example of a building that they used old timber beams, and then they were adding some structural elements in steel in order to make it work. So things maybe become a little bit more bespoke, but then the materials are really important to kind of keep them and keep using them and not losing that value. And of course, there are different supply chains. There's the take-back schemes that manufacturers can have. They can have their materials back and then remanufacture them. You have salvage companies that have those materials. You have also different stakeholders, but also we think it's really important that we use the current supply chain and integrate those materials, so we don't need to create something totally new. We can just use what we've got. So imagine that you go to a shop, and then instead of having just the normal materials, you have also the reused materials there. You can buy them straight away. So that's one of the things that we would like to cover. And when we are designing, we say a lot that we design for disassembly and adaptability, or at least disassembly, we assume that the building will be taken apart and then assembled again. But you can see that if you want to assemble it in a different way, and if it's not a modular system, you may have a problem. If you design for adaptability, maybe you will have different uses of that building. If you are designing for loose fit, then you allow some flexibility. So if the reused materials are not available, the ones that you were specifying are not available in the market, then you can adjust them. But I think it's also important to think about design, also having in mind that at some point will be deconstructed, and doesn't need necessarily to be disassembled and assembled similar, but at least we get into the conversation with the deconstruction contractors, so then they will be able to also to help us in this process and work collaboratively. So in terms of the deconstruction plan, the idea is we have different materials, products, systems, and elements that compose our building, and then we dismantle them, and then you can unfold that into the same categories again.
Thank you. So, as Anna has talked you through, we have looked at all of the aspects of reuse and materials and what our design process as architects should be and how we should be building these kinds of buildings. So those are all of the different aspects on the circle on the screen. But obviously the crux of all of this is the material passports piece. So why material passports? What do they do for us? By having knowledge about a material, it means that you can safely reuse it. So when you are working as an architect, you will be looking at all of these materials and you might say, I could reuse that, but you have to make sure that the client is being protected, that this material isn't going to fail, there isn't going to be a problem. So that's why we need this data, we need this information to be able to understand this risk and mitigate it. And the material passport work that we've been doing today, well, this year, has been looking at all of the issues that we had uncovered with our original approach. So the very first approaches with BAM and some of the material passport platforms that existed, they were all aimed at gathering data about new materials so that we could reuse them in the future. And we were interested about using data that we could gather today to reuse materials that we have here today. The original work then that we did was looking at how we could integrate that process, what that might look like for an architect during the design process. But there were lots of questions around how do we name things, how do we gather the data, where does all of that data live? And that's what we've been aiming to overcome. So this piece of work is hopefully going to create a clear deliverable for all projects, all levels, all scales, all project teams. So every project should be collecting data about the existing buildings that are there on site and about any new materials that they're putting into the building, and that will enable us to reuse materials now and in the future. This has thrown up a lot of questions. As with all research pieces, there's always more that we need to study. So the next big question we're going to be asking is, where does the data live? How can this be managed into the future? How do we take this at a societal level to help improve reuse as an entire industry within the country and our part as part of the global supply chain? So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Catherine.